So, okay, so I kind of just threw a few quick slides together on a lot of troubleshooting scenarios. So basically the common cases that we get. So I'll kind of walk through, those main issues. So first is if the ENOB is inactive, I kind of wrote what processes to follow. We kind of covered that when we looked at the main page before, but the very first thing you want to check, obviously, is the IPsec disconnected? If it's disconnected, then you need to make sure you have a route out to the internet, of course, with that interface. You want to make sure that the tunnel itself is enabled, and you want to make sure from the IPsec page that the gateway is set to this address. Now, like I mentioned before, we had an issue where some of the ENOBs pre-November that were shipped out, they did not have the right address. So,
actually, before we hit to troubleshooting, let's go ahead and take our break because troubleshooting could prompt, more Q&A and stuff like that, and I don't want to rush through that part. So.
All right, so let's continue with this scenario here. So we basically discussed making sure IPsec is connected. And like I mentioned, there might be an issue with the configuration. So if it's out of the box, you just opened it. This is good to note for the first item. Second, if it is connected, but MME is disconnected, the first thing is maybe just wait, especially if you just powered it on, because it can take, sometimes it can take a few minutes for the MME connection to take place. If for some reason that MME IP changed, you'll want to make sure you change it back, 10304, that's the IP of the MME over the IPsec tunnel. The other thing we found, and this is kind of also related to potentially a wrong config, is you'll notice when you buy new eNodeBs that the cell ID that comes with it is kind of a long, it seems random number, but there's a calculation to it. We base that, I believe, off the MAC address of the eNodeB. So each eNodeB should have a unique cell ID. But if there's a confliction, we found that some with the wrong config were set to 50, and then maybe someone else has an eNodeB set to 50, so they're flapping, they're fighting each other for the MME connection. So these are things to note if the MME is not connecting. One thing I didn't write on here is the other thing it could be is GPS isn't syncing. So if you have the GPS antenna plugged in, it will actually synchronize first before becoming active. But I believe the MME should be connected even during that phase. But I already mentioned this before. I'd recommend not using VLANs right now. We found an issue with that that can cause issues with the APC connection.
We send every Friday without fail. We've done one since, I guess it was, started these in June. So you can sign up for that newsletter. Also, we have a link from the Facebook page. We have a link from the bottom of the web. Actually, you open up the website, it's staring at you right there in your face. So, because we want people to get those regular updates, and that's where Jesse posts technical stuff. So when this thing is fixed, for example, we'll make sure that message gets out there.
Okay. All right, so if the eNodeB is active, but the CPE, or the CPE is actually attached, but there's no user traffic. I've ran into this a few times with customer support issues. First of all, like I mentioned, you want to make sure LGW is enabled. If for whatever reason that got disabled, our cloud core will actually drop all the user traffic. If you have router mode, a lot of people will switch to router mode, but either not know or forget to add static routes on their network to be able to route to that network. So of course you want to make sure that that network that you set in router mode, the subnet facing the clients, that it is routable. If bridge mode is being used, you just want to make sure that the DHCP server is on that network. We do have the fourth item is an issue we found kind of recently where a CPE might suddenly lose its gateway, but it usually happens if the CPE drops, disconnects, and then reconnects. There's a chance that the default gateway will not be received. So in this case, the CPE appears to be attached, but it just isn't passing any traffic, and usually the subscriber would have to power cycle it to bring it back. I posted a link here on the Keep Alive page. This is where you can do a kind of a ping watchdog type feature where you can set, to ping a certain IP address. So this would be a temporary solution if this is a problem that you guys have experienced. We are implementing a full ping watchdog feature in later softwares. This will work, Keep Alive works, but the issue is you can't set the interval, so it's always going to be 1 second is the only issue with that. So basically every second it will ping, and after so many timeouts that you specify, it would just reboot the CPE. So that would, like I said, temporarily resolve the losing gateway issue.
Just go on the Keep Alive thing. As far as LT resourcing is concerned, use it if you need to, but don't get in the habit of setting a Keep Alive interval of 1 second for your entire network. That really messes up with your air utilization time and how much capacity your cell is going to take, because essentially that means your UEs are constantly transmitting to get a response. So it's overall, it will have a negative impact on your network at 1 second. So use it for those customers as a workaround that you absolutely need to.
Correct. So, yeah, in LTE, when we talked a little bit about scheduling earlier, only so many UEs can be scheduled at one time. So if you have lots of UEs doing management traffic, it will affect the aggregate throughput. Okay, this we kind of touched on with if the CPE or ENOB is not listed in the OMC. First, you want to make sure that you onboarded it on the device page. We walked through that on an earlier slide. It does not automatically add itself. If at that point you verified that the serial number or MAC address was entered correctly and it's connected but it just doesn't show online on the OMC, at that point it could be a DNS issue. So if there's no DNS server assigned or just doesn't work, that would be an issue. The other is I listed the TR69 ACS parameter, and this is what you'd want to enter into the CPE. So just check the TR69 settings, make sure that that's in there. If for whatever reason that changed, then that might be a reason. There's also, the eNode B has this parameter as well. It's called the management IP server. And then lastly, I ran into this once with one operator where they were blocking outbound ports. So you'll just want to make sure that that port, if you are doing firewall rules for outbound, make sure to allow that port out. So if the CPE does not fully attach, so if the CPE, you can see the signal, it's receiving signal, but it just never connects. We talked about this earlier too. Just make sure the IMSI is activated. So that's on the BOSS subscriber page. So if that got forgotten to be added, then it just won't attach because it cannot authenticate to the network. USIM status, you want to make sure it says ready. If there's an issue with the slot or SIM card itself, it may say USIM not ready. You want to make sure, of course, the eNode B is active so that the RF is turned on. Another issue you may have is you could be at a pretty far distance and you could still measure the actual signal. So if you're at, say, 20 miles, you might see the signal. It might show you, some of the metrics, but it won't actually attach. And that's due to some of the parameters limiting the distance. So I listed here is a kind of a screenshot in the corner there of one of the parameters you can adjust to increase the distance from 10 kilometers to 14 kilometers. So you got better performance out of 11. Yeah. I mean, when you increase distance with parameters, I mean, theoretically it will affect the throughput, but I don't think it should affect it that much. Okay, that's a good note. Yeah, so I'll discuss that with the team then, because that's the first time I've
What
heard
size
of that.
channel are you running? Okay.
Yeah. So, but you were able to prove that by changing it to 11 or 10? Okay, it might be a bug then, so that's a good thing to note. Thank you. If there's something wrong with the eNodeB itself, whether it reached a bug or for whatever issue, the next recourse would be to reboot the eNodeB, see if that allows the CPU to reconnect. If it does, then I would probably ask that you send us a support request. That way we could review your logs to find out why you need to reboot, because that shouldn't be the normal behavior. And then lastly, if there's heavy interference or heavy path loss, that would also affect the UE from maybe seeing signal, but not actually being able to attach. All right, so when we're troubleshooting LTE networks, the main kind of metric I look for, since we don't really have a spectrum analyzer, the best way to try to help determine interference is with blur. So if you remember in some earlier slides, we talked about HARC briefly, where it sends you the acknowledgement messages and non-acknowledgement. So we just take that calculation to determine what is the percentage of unacknowledged messages. So, and then the other thing, if you remember, the target is 10%. In LTE, the specs are designed for it to be under 10. So as you can see with this example here, there's definitely spikes that are over 10. Now, it will occasionally spike, but anything spikes, for a consistent time over 10, there's a chance that the UEs will disconnect. So in this, you can see that there's kind of a burst of interference on the downlink and uplink at a particular point. And for this particular customer, this is a report I was running off their eNodeB when troubleshooting interference. So one of the issues right now is to get this report, it's through the syslog. So I kind of just parse the syslog to generate this. We will have KPIs in the near future, so from the OMC, that you could also view these kind of metrics. And I'm also planning to implement a program you can upload your syslog to, and it would generate all these for you. And then of course you'll have, in the future, we'll have SNMP so that you can monitor these as well. Okay. So, yeah, so other than, so when we're talking about interference, the other thing to note is interference isn't just due to, RF. It can be due to the PCI collisions, which Cameron will discuss later. And it can also be due to high PIM. So in LTE, PIM is it's very sensitive to PIM. So when you're selecting your coax cables, you want to generally select something that's truly low PIM grade. So they do have special cables, almost designed just for LTE in a sense, as just any kind of PIMs within the cabling can cause issues like spikes, so that potentially this could be even PIM related.
How many people, just by a quick show of hands, use an LMR 400? You're probably going to have a problem at some point. Preferably some sort of half-inch heliax. Cables like that with low PIM connectors. We're going to be working with some of our distributors to talk about some of the cables we recommend, but be on the lookout for a low PIM connector. And they also have pre-PIMmed cables that you can buy. Come again? Superflex would work, yes.
What brings about the issue with LMR 400 producing PIM issue? Do they stay dirty? Is there not enough isolation?
Well, typically, more often than not, I'm going to guess by the same show of hands, you probably make your own LMR jumpers. If you guys wouldn't mind, just putting your hands up here if you're making your own LMR 400 jumpers. I'm victim of this as well. So I make my own cables, and I had been for a long time before I switched to Heliax or Superflex. It's almost impossible, at least with the easy 400 connectors, to have a cable that you make that will pass a PIM test. It's just inevitable, and it's really sensitive in the LT modulation schemes that the cable is going to pass just about every sweep test you put on, and it's going to look great. But if you put it on a PIM test, it will fail nearly 8 to 9 times out of 10. It was almost remarkable. I didn't believe it until I started seeing some issues of my own, and I kind of learned the hard way that trying to just buy a big 1,000-foot reel of whatever the flavor of the month was for LMR 400 and doing my own. But it made a big difference switching to low PIM cables, and that came pre-PIM, and particularly a Superflex or a Heliax type of cable. There's some other technical descriptions in it as to why, but I won't get into that right at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and you just got to be careful because LMR 400s, they'll market it as low PIM. Just be careful of that.
So what do you recommend? LMR 400 to comment on others because you're not looking for other brands?
Sure. I'm comfortable with like a Superflex or a Heliax type cable. I don't know, as far as distributors, I don't know if Dennis, if you're carrying a low PIM type of cable in stock, you are. Of course he is.
Yeah, partners I neglected to mention. Dennis and Linktex, they're also here, so
Yeah.
yes.
I feel humbled by being in the presence of a microtech god. Yes, sir.
Hey Patrick, why don't you just charge us the extra money and throw them in the kit?
Charge us the extra money to throw them in the kit.
So
Throw us the cable in the kit that you recommend.
So the Eno B does not, it might have came like with the trials from a long ways back, but the actual cables do not come with the Eno B. So if they do come with the Eno B, then that's something the distributor is throwing in.
No, I'm suggesting re-kitting with cable.
Oh, well, we don't know. I mean,
We
could, but we don't know the length, right? That will be end up desired.
We've given, KP will be here, I think, a little bit later. I've kind of given them an earful to start working on low PIM cables and having that available. So yes, to answer your question in short, we have talked with KP. To answer your question, sir, is I don't know about you, but every installation is slightly different. At least that's what I've come to find. Typically, I built it up so I could get away with a 6-foot cable or less. And that is something we could consider, but given the uniqueness of every installation that we all run into, I think creating a one-size-fits-all approach could become problematic. And it'd probably be best just to work with our distributors. And that's to say we couldn't work with those distributors to create a single SKU. So you're ordering a part number that comes with the antenna of your choosing, a cable of your choosing, and the radio of your choosing. And I'm sure every distributor here loves to make a buck, so I'm sure they'll make a SKU for you.
Can I get you to draft a blog post on PIM, and then Rick will translate that into a buy tip as well?
Sure.
Let's get that and get it on the website, because it's something I only recently learned about myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Cameron, we also might want to work with the distributors that are going to sell low PIM cables. You talked about the failure rate if the guys are making them themselves. We need to educate the distributors that are going to make it to run the tests and make sure that they're going to pass.
Yeah, and I don't expect everybody in here, I expect distributors probably to have it. If they don't, is a PIM tester. PIM testers aren't cheap. I think they're close to 30 grand. So I don't expect all y'all to go out and drop 30 grand. You'd rather be dropping that on our E-Node Bs, and so would I.
We'll make sure that Boone helps get this message out to the partners, the importance of this.
Yeah.
Okay. So Actually, this all came as a report from the same time. So in addition to blur, I'll usually try to check for the downlink MCS percentages. So as you can see, and if you referenced it with that blur report during the spikes, you can also see that the downlink MCS is affected, and it's actually dropping quite a bit. This specific customer was having issues of customers' internet speeds just randomly dropping to be really slow, which we're believing to be mostly interference related. It could be PIM related, but these are just metrics to check for when troubleshooting performance issues. Then here's the uplink. So uplink MCS is a little bit more difficult to track just due to the nature of every UE's TX powers going up and down. But you can kind of view it in a way. You can see that during the downlink MCS drops that the uplink MCS was also dropping at the same time. And one issue you'll find is if it drops heavy enough, then some of the, like we mentioned before, the schedule requests, some of those schedule requests can time out. And then there's timers and LTE, so there could be, too low of upload MCS could cause issues where internet just drops for a short period of time. That would be the end user's experience. So this is where, LTE doesn't really have any interference mitigation techniques built in to the OFDMA standards. So that these are things that when planning the RF, PCI planning, and these are all incredibly way more important with LTE than anything else. And this is the last other metric I look for. This is the retransmission count. So here I got the downlink and uplink. And I can see, because actually this customer was experiencing exactly that internet would almost pause or drop. And you can see during the big spikes of retransmit counts, there's a certain max count. If a UE reaches that max count, it will actually time out and essentially almost reconnect. So anyways, these are metrics that we're going to plan to provide everyone in a more easy way. They're available to us through the syslog, but you have to parse through it to draw this stuff up. So via KPIs, via SNMP, and we're also working on a parsing program you can uplink files to generate this stuff. So eventually we'll offer a more easy way for everyone to view this.